Welcome back, young scholars. In this video, we will be discussing the bureaucracy, and specifically the bureaucracy of the executive branch. The big question you should be able to answer after watching this video is, what are the various departments and agencies within the executive branch, and what are their roles and responsibilities? So as you're aware, we have three separate branches in our government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. When it comes to each of those branches, though, the number of people that are necessary to carry out the functions of those branches are very different. The executive branch is by far the largest branch of government in terms of the number of people that work within the branch. You can see all the various agencies and departments that exist under essentially the leadership of the president as the executive officer. And so all of these different agencies and departments are necessary to execute and carry out the various laws of the United States. So when we think about the executive branch, our mind almost immediately focuses on the office of the president. But in reality, the president is just really the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg really is that massive executive bureaucracy that exists with all of these various executive departments and executive agencies and the office of the president. And so today we're going to be doing some exploring beneath the surface and looking at some of the aspects of the executive branch that extend beyond just the role of the president. So the executive branch includes a large, complex federal bureaucracy. What does it mean, this word bureaucracy? Well, a bureaucracy is a system designed to manage and carry out the functions of government. So in this case, we're talking about different agencies and departments that help the president execute and carry out the laws of the United States. When it comes to the executive bureaucracy, we can break it down into a number of individual roles and then some larger departments and agencies. First, we have the White House staff, which includes the chief of staff. And the chief of staff is really the gatekeeper for the president, determining who the president gets to see on a day-to-day basis and determining what the president's daily agenda should look like. You also have the executive office of the president. Now, this is well illustrated in the NBC television show The West Wing, which is on Netflix right now. And it gives you sort of an idea of the inner workings of the executive office of the president and the White House staff. So if you get a chance, it's an excellent show. I highly recommend it. The term West Wing refers to the office where these people work, which is in the West Wing of the White House. And you can see the various offices held by different members of the White House staff. The second executive role I want to discuss is the vice president. Our current vice president is Mike Pence, former governor of Indiana. One of my favorite things in politics is the way Saturday Night Live engages in some good satire when it comes to various political figures. In this video, it's from the campaign in 2008, where the candidates were Barack Obama and John McCain, but this video will not feature either Barack Obama or John McCain. Instead, it will feature their running mates or vice presidential candidates, and those were Joe Biden and Sarah Palin.
Look, I love John McCain. He is one of my dearest friends. But at the same time, he's also dangerously unbalanced. I mean, let's be frank. John McCain, and again, this is a man I would take a bullet for, is bad at his job and mentally unstable.
Governor Palin, would you like to respond to Senator Biden's comments about John McCain?
No, thank you, but I would like to talk about being an outsider. You see, while Senator Biden has been in Washington all these years, I've been with regular people, hockey moms and Joe Six-Packs and...
So that video really highlights two of the major roles that vice presidential candidates play. And that is first to balance the ticket. So in the case of John McCain, you had an older male running for president, and sometimes it makes sense to try and appeal to various demographic groups with the combined ticket of the president and vice president. And so there was an idea that the Republicans could balance out that ticket by including a woman who's a little bit younger on the ticket. The second role that vice presidential candidates oftentimes play is as the attack dog. And you saw that where Joe Biden was attempting to attack his good friend, Senator John McCain, but ultimately had a really hard time playing that role. But those really are two very key roles that vice presidential candidates play, at least when it comes to the campaign. When it comes to actually serving in the office of the vice president, it's always important to remember that the vice president is one heartbeat or impeachment away, and that's required under the 25th Amendment. So under the 25th Amendment, it spells out the line of succession after the president. If the president dies or is unable to carry out the functions of the presidency, the vice president then steps into that office and becomes the president. This has happened 9 times throughout American history. So lest you think, well, it's not really important who the vice president is, 9 out of the 45 vice presidents have gone on to become president. From William Henry Harrison, who died of pneumonia and was replaced by John Tyler, or Zachary Taylor, who also died in office and was replaced by Millard Fillmore, or Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated and replaced by Andrew Johnson, or James Garfield, who was also assassinated and replaced by Chester A. Arthur, or William McKinley, who was assassinated and was replaced by Teddy Roosevelt, or Warren Harding, who died in office and was replaced by good old silent Cal Coolidge, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who died in office and was replaced by Harry Truman, or John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in office, replaced by Johnson, or Richard Nixon, who resigned from office and was replaced by Gerald Ford. So one of the essential jobs of the vice president is to just simply be ready for that phone call letting them know that now the most powerful office in the world now belongs to them. The one critical role that the vice president plays in the Constitution, and this is just one of those weird quirks of the Constitution, is that the vice president actually serves as the president of the Senate. And as the president of the Senate, the vice president has the sole job of breaking ties. So as the president of the Senate, the vice president casts a vote in the event of a 50-50 tie. So here you can see a vote in the Senate that was tied, and so Vice President Mike Pence was needed to break that tie and cast the 51st vote. Another role that I want to discuss is of the First Lady, or probably soon to be First Spouse. Now this is a role that obviously dates back to George Washington, the very first First Lady, Martha Washington. The social norms and expectations at the time was that they serve essentially as a hostess for parties in the White House. But that role has evolved and changed over time. So a few notable First Ladies, one that I would like you to be familiar with, Edith Wilson, who was the wife of Woodrow Wilson. Well, when Woodrow Wilson got a stroke late in his presidency, it was essentially Edith Wilson who took over the powers of the president. And in some ways, Edith Wilson was, in fact, our first female president. There's a lot of evidence that she was behind the scenes calling a lot of shots, while her husband was incapacitated and unable to make decisions after having suffered a stroke late in his presidency. Another great example of a First Lady who's really transformed the role of the office is Eleanor Roosevelt, who you can see here pictured going down into the coal mines in order to see what life is like for coal miners during the Great Depression. Because Franklin Delano Roosevelt suffered from polio and had difficulty walking, it really was up to Eleanor Roosevelt to go out and interact with Americans to understand what the effects of the Great Depression were. The role of the First Lady has really evolved over time from official hostess, and increasingly it's a role that's seen as more of an activist role for certain causes. Now these typically aren't very controversial causes. You have Nancy Reagan here, who was very much involved in the Just Say No campaign. You had Hillary Clinton, who took on some responsibilities around trying to fix the healthcare system in the United States. Or Michelle Obama with her Let's Move campaign and her ideas about trying to get healthier foods in schools. Or Melania Trump, who has a campaign called the Be Best campaign, which is designed to promote awareness of cyberbullying. But most people who work in the executive bureaucracy work in a variety of different executive departments. And currently there are 15 executive departments in the United States government. There's the Department of State, Treasury, Interior, Agriculture, Justice, Commerce, Labor, Defense, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security. You'll notice Homeland Security was created in 2003, and so you can guess that Homeland Security was created in response to the events of 9/11. So the Department of Homeland Security is the most recent executive department that was created. There hasn't always been 15 executive departments. In fact, the first president, President Washington, only had 4. There was the Department of Treasury, the Department of War, the Department of State, and the Justice Department. President Washington decided that he needed to get advisors together to discuss issues. And so he formed what's known as the cabinet. So these secretaries, the people who are heads of the various executive departments, serve as advisors to the president in the cabinet. You can tell that there are a lot more cabinet members today, 16 of them if you include the vice president. Executive departments create regulations, and what a regulation is a rule for carrying out the law. Power is delegated by Congress to these various departments to execute and manage certain areas of the law. So for instance, there are regulations created by the Department of Education that deal with issues around special education services, or for the Department of Energy to determine fuel efficiency standards. We also have independent agencies, the United States government. There are a whole host of them, hundreds of them. They serve particular purposes. They're established typically by Congress, and typically they report to the president. And you know a few examples of these. For instance, NASA is an independent agency responsible for space exploration. You have the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, which collects information and intelligence from around the world. You have the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which ensures environmental standards are established and followed throughout the country. And then finally, you have the largest independent agency, the United States Postal Service, USPS, which obviously provides mail service throughout the country. So the federal government now employs nearly 2 million Americans, mainly in the executive departments, which makes it the largest employer in the United States. The largest private employer is Walmart, but the United States government, the good old federal government, has them beat. Now, the vast majority of federal employees work in areas around national defense, whether it's in the Defense Department themselves, many of them are soldiers, or people that work at the VA, at the hospitals, and healthcare centers throughout the United States provide healthcare to veterans. So the big question you should be able to answer after watching this video is, what are the various departments and agencies within the executive branch, and what are their roles and responsibilities? As always, thanks for watching.